மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
Well, now we come to the exchange variation, where there have been some important new developments. White takes on d6, and as recommended in the first edition, I'm sticking with e takes d6. This is a very solid move and remains so in 2011. But after knight c3, it's very important that black gets the move order right in this position. Because if he plays bishop e7, which has been the old main line for some time, white has been getting very good results with bishop d3. And the point of this move is to achieve the setup with the bishop on d3 and the knight on e2. The point of this setup is to make it as difficult as possible for black to find a good square for the bishop on c8. And this has been scoring very well for white. Accordingly, I think the best way to steer a delicate course around this is to play with knight c6. And hopefully, if white plays normally here, for instance with knight f3, well, we can play bishop g4, bishop e2, bishop e7, bishop e3, and get back into the main line, which is okay for black. So my first game comes from the Vikings A tournament in 2010, at the highest level of world chess, between Hungarian Grandmaster Peter Leko and Nigel Short. And Short played knight c6. Short in general is not afraid to experiment in the opening in any way. Well, Leko continued with h3. Again, a very traditional move in the exchange variation, just trying to put the block on this bishop at c8. Black played bishop e7 and white played knight f3. Well, now black brings his bishop out to f5. In general, if black can find a good square for this bishop early on, then he gets a reasonable position out of the opening. And Leko decided to play bishop d3. I suppose if white wants to be ambitious in this situation, he would try bishop e2, and then after castles we reach a traditional position in this line. But bishop d3, well, Shaw answered it with the economical move queen d7. There's no reason at this moment in time for black to take on d3. This is just a move which gives white more options. So Shaw elects to develop a piece and protect the bishop. Both sides castle, and now white has to decide on his plan. b3 was the move. Alright, bishop f6, and now knight e2. Well, white is trying to force black's hand here by bringing the knight to g3. Then black has to do something with the bishop. If white plays a3, then a6 has been recommended, with the idea that black can marshal his rooks in the e file after rook fe8, knight e2, and then rook e7. White can play the traditional plan in this way, bringing the knight to g3. Yes, black has to take on d3, but after g6, rook a e1, rook a e8, black has a comfortable position. This would be a typical way to marshal the black forces in this line. So going back to the game Leko versus Short, white plays knight e2 right away, and black plays rook fe8. White goes knight g3, and Short again declines the capture on d3, preferring bishop g6. Let's just see why he does this. If white recaptures on d3, black goes g6 to keep the white pieces out of f5, then bishop g5 might give white a little something in this position due to the slight dark square weaknesses around the king, and the usual problem in the Alekhine, if there is one, the poorly placed black knight on b6. So that's why Short retreats. Leko chops off the bishop on g6, and only now does he play bishop g5. But this time around, the black kingside pawn position is more secure, and I think black has probably made it to equality in this position. Well, Short now plays an absolutely typical move from this variation, the move d5, gaining space in the centre and more or less forcing white's hand. If white wants anything in this position at all, he's got to push on. Black quickly redirects the knight. It's an urgent thing to connect the rooks, get that knight up to f5 if he can. Alekhine brings his knight back to e2, and black takes some squares with f6 and then g5. Queen to d3. Well, okay, that just takes some squares and prepares to put a rook on the e file. King f7, perhaps white has a very, very small edge in this position, but it's certainly nothing to write home about. Black plays a6, rook comes up to e3, and now black pushes ahead with g4. Knight h2, g takes h3, rook takes h3, and short challenges the h-file with rook h8. Well, Alekhine's only working with very limited tools in this position. Perhaps white maintains a very small edge indeed, but it's hard to see him breaking through. Black's position is extremely solid. So g5, taking a bit of space on the king side. White brings his knight around again, knight g6, and now stabilisation with f3. Knight ce7. Well, you know, maybe short could have even played f5. I mean, one can see why he doesn't do this. It looks very weakening. The point of it, of course, is that after f4 we're going to go g4. We're staking out some space on the king side. Everything's going to hinge here as to whether white can get a knight to e5 quicker than black can get a knight to e4. And it's not at all clear who's going to win that battle. Short might have been able to do this. He sticks with a solid move, knight ce7, and the thought that there isn't really much in this game continues after knight g4 and then c6. Rook e1 was answered by knight f5 and king f2 by knight g7. Still a lot of toing and froing going on after knight g3, knight f4. Neither side can create any real threats. Rook comes into h4, rook h1, typical Alekhine style, and white continues to work with a minimal edge in the knight endgame after knight h6, king g6, knight takes, king takes, g4 check, king e6, and then king e3. Okay, well, whatever plus there is for white here is very symbolic. Short checks the white king, brings the knight back. There's a little bit of toing and froing. Alekhine repeats moves, and now the way to play these endgames is to try and exchange off pawns. So f5 is a good move. Alekhine brings his knight back into the game. There's another check. There's an exchange of pawns, and black just retreats his king. He's inviting Alekhine to actually show how he's going to win this position. Meanwhile, the black knight takes up a very nice residence at e6. Knight f3. Okay, well, you could have envisaged this position as white at the start of the knight endgame and just assumed that you were a little bit better in this position. But there are no meaningful pawn breaks for white. So black continues reducing the amount of material on the board. The more pawns that come off, the easier it is to draw this. King comes to d3, king a5, king c3, king b5. Really, the two players could have agreed a draw in this position. And in fact, not much happens for the rest of this game. Knight comes to f4, knight c5, knight h3, knight d3, knight g1. A lot of toing and froing here going on. Knight e5 was answered by knight g2 check. Back comes the knight. Back comes the knight to e6, and the game is agreed drawn after a few more symbolic moves. Nothing actually happens in the rest of this game. So let's go back to the opening. Okay, please remember that the greatest danger to black in this variation, the exchange variation with e takes d6, is the setup for white with bishop d3 and knight e2. Knight c6 is an improved move order for black and should give adequate play.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. தேங்க்யூ.